This meeting is now being recorded.
Yes, we're fortunate to have Michael Bishop with us today. He's going to share about, as the head of GIS, he's going to share some projects, and I'll let him just take it away. Michael.
You bet. Can you guys hear me? I
Yes.
do need to share my screen. So do you have to make me the presenter, or how does that work?
I've now given you the ability to share your screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So let me see. Technical difficulties, of course. Oh, wait a minute. Doing the wrong thing here. Got too many things. Here we go. Share screen. Okay. All right, let me fire off the presentation. Let's hope this goes to that screen.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you guys see it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Michael Bishop. I'm the GIS Systems Manager for Samaritan's Purse. Some people like to call me the GIS Manager, but the system is the important part. I don't have any direct reports. I'm really in charge of the system, but I wanted to give a kind of a brief overview of some of the ministries. You've already heard from a couple of the guys in the ministry, and I want to talk specifically about that. But just so you know, this is our 50th year in ministry. It's amazing. And my first year at Samaritan's Purse. So what a blessing to have Samaritan's Purse around for that long. It's just boggles my mind. I'm a little over 50, but not much over 50. So it's almost been around as long as I've been around. So the things I want to talk about today is just want to do a ministry overview, like I just mentioned. Then I want to talk really about what we're doing with GIS at Samaritan's Purse, and then really the goals for the GIS program going forward. So I'm going to switch to something that hopefully this is going to work. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, so I got the wrong thing. Can you guys see the this part of the presentation too? You see the map series? Are you guys seeing that? Seeing a map right now?
Yes, you can. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. Awesome. All right. Yeah, I'm going to use GIS in this presentation, believe it or not. Wow. Hey, so I don't know if you know this, but Samaritan's Purse is actually a worldwide organization. We have offices throughout North America, of course, and I'll talk a little more deeply about that. I'm in Boone, North Carolina. That's where headquarters is at. But we have what are called affiliate offices throughout the world. So we have an office in Great Britain. We have an office in Germany. We have an office in Africa and Kenya, and we have an office in affiliate office in Australia. And then we have what are called field offices, kind of interspersed throughout the world. Those do in-country programming, but I'll dive in a little bit more to that. So many of you are aware of some of the ministries of Samaritan's Purse, and hopefully this is one ministry that's fairly familiar to you, Operation Christmas Child. So just briefly, this is a ministry where folks, anyone really, can pack a shoebox full of Christmas toys, age appropriate for a boy or a girl, and then deliver it to a local church so that it can be delivered worldwide. And I just want to dive in a little bit more. So part of that North American offices that we have are the Operation Christmas Child offices, which are staffed full-time, because you can imagine it's a logistics thing. It's a big deal. So we have churches that we coordinate with, and hopefully you can see this. The little black dots are what we call drop-off locations. The red dots are the network of central drop-off locations. So that coordination is happening all the time, year through, with these churches to become those locations. And we're using GIS in all kinds of different ways in this ministry. This is just one example of a drive time analysis that was done around some of those churches. But, you know, shameless plug, please pack a shoebox and drop it off at a nearest drop-off location. There should be a church near you that you can drop off a shoebox at. Just one shoebox. I packed a couple last year, my first time actually. So I'm looking forward to this year. It's ramping up. It happens in this holiday season. Really, the big time is right around Thanksgiving. So look for any information about that. If you don't know about it, go to our website, shameless plug again. But okay, so the drop-off location, and then what happens is the drop-off boxes, whether they're hundreds or thousands, get shipped to our processing centers. So we have processing centers, large warehouses really that are strategically located throughout the nation. And shoeboxes go from being evaluated by our volunteers, and these are all volunteer run, can you believe? So this ministry is volunteer run for the most part. We do have a few staff in here, but mostly these are volunteers looking at the shoeboxes, packing them into bigger boxes, which eventually get into containers. All right, and then they are distributed throughout the world. This is last year's distribution for the most part, the countries that we distributed to. So, and then I just wanted to show you some fun pictures about those last few miles of transportation. So you can imagine it's a logistics, it's a logistics problem where GIS can really become a part of solving the logistics problem. We're honestly not using it fully in that area, but hopefully we will. But the end result of bringing those boxes in is to deliver them to children worldwide. And our goal is one box for one child throughout the world for all time. So this is, this is the reaction that we often get. It's fantastic. But the end goal of the program really is to share the gospel with these children through what we call the greatest journey. So you can imagine this again is a logistics thing where we have to provide the teachers and the distribution network and the churches that are involved. And so it's a big undertaking, huge undertaking. Millions of boxes every year are delivered worldwide. So it's pretty incredible. So I want to shift now to another ministry. You heard from Tim Opelt. He's in the international projects wing. So maybe this is less familiar to you, but we actually have done international disaster relief for quite a few years now. Tim could actually tell you more of the history since I'm fairly new to the organization, but this map is showing just all of the historical locations of where we've done disaster relief. But part of the international projects is also that we have field hospitals. We send clinicians to hospitals in the field. These are hospitals that are in country that have been established, and we provide doctors that can work with the local population. So that's part of the ministry too. And then of course, probably you've heard of our emergency field hospitals. So when there's a disaster, we can deliver an emergency field hospital. And what's really incredible is we have all these resources. God has blessed us with these resources to be able to pack up, to ship off whatever needs to go to a disaster zone as quick as we can. In fact, we have our own planes that can take the shipping containers to wherever it goes, and usually within 48 hours we can deliver something like a field hospital to the Bahamas, like this. And this is Grand Bahama right after the big hurricane there. And so again, how are we using GIS in international projects? Well, this is showing the disaster zone in Beirut. It's being a little slow here, but whether we need to do an inventory of folks after a disaster, after the explosion in Beirut, we're on the ground using GIS to help us understand how we can better coordinate those kinds of efforts. Or we're using GIS to just look at the COVID crisis, right? So this is our international map. It's been loading a little slow again. I'm sorry if this is taking a little bit of time, but we use GIS to help us understand what's going on in the crisis and how we might respond. Now, some of you might have heard that we took an emergency field hospital to New York City. Got a lot of press, of course, some positive, mostly positive, some negative, unfortunately. But we're thankful that we were able to take this hospital and our clinicians, which are a volunteer staff again, and bring them in and really help during the crisis. But what's interesting about this deployment of the field hospital is it was a cooperation between international projects, because they're the ones that have normally distributed or set up the emergency field hospitals internationally, and a cooperative effort between them and North American Ministries. So North American Ministries, as the name implies, is our disaster response ministry that takes care of North America, mainly in the United States, but also some in Canada. And the blessing that we have there is that we have units like these. These are mobile command centers that can be driven to the disaster zone, full of equipment, and also a command center. There's computers in the front and all that to really do analysis. But how are we using GIS in this realm? Well, like for the Navajo Nation response, we tried to evaluate that large geographic area to determine where we might distribute water and supplies. And we also used GIS to look at the disaster in Louisiana with Hurricane Laura, and what kind of work are we doing, and how can we situate people in an effective way. So, and we also use GIS to just in North American ministries to look at all the events that are happening currently. So this is a current view of what's going on, disaster wise, or whether it's wildfires or hurricanes or windstorms or tornadoes. We're trying to keep our eye to figure out maybe where we might go next. So again, we can roll tons of equipment, but the reality is that as a Christian ministry, the most important thing is ministering to the people, and that needs to be our focus. That needs to be the focus of GIS and the ministry in Samaritan's Purse. But what we rely on a lot, especially in North American ministries and even throughout other ministries in Samaritan's Purse, is our volunteers, and they're so important. They're there to give a cup of cold water, to give that needed hug when people are at their lowest. So so this is just showing where we've responded in North America and where we are currently responding, amazingly. Hopefully you can see some of this, but like the red triangles are where we're responding right now in Oregon, in California, of course, in Louisiana, and in Alabama. So we have those disaster relief units, those big trucks that are there now helping, and just resources. But again, I want to emphasize that the important thing here is ministering to the people, being Jesus' hands and feet to the people, to those that are really hurting, whether it's hurting veterans, which we have a ministry called Operation Heal Our Patriots, whether it's NAM or international projects. We're really focused on wanting to be God's hands and feet and to spread his good news through that ability to reach out to people. So I'm going to shift gears back to my PowerPoint. Let's see if I can do this. I have so many things on my screen. I'm sorry. Here we go. There we go. So, okay, it's a smattering of things. Now you see that Samaritan's Purse is, God's blessed us to be able to go out to almost the whole world and really minister in different ways. And it's just amazing. So let me dig a little bit deeper into how we're currently using GIS. And again, I just wanted to emphasize the ministries, this more in Word format. So the ones that I didn't talk about, sorry, I don't want to click, is donor ministries. So we have obviously donors that are really the most important part of our ministry, to tell you the truth, because without them we wouldn't be able to do what we do. So we have people using GIS and donor ministries. We have, of course, I said Operation Christmas Child, both domestic and international. The domestic part, of course, is that collection network that I talked about, but then there's that whole logistics piece of shipping to international ports and distributing those shoeboxes. We're not using GIS as effectively as we could there. In North American ministries, we have the disaster relief part, which I mentioned, but I did a little bit mention Operation Heal Our Patriots. So we have aftercare, we have chaplains that take care of our veterans after they've attended what we consider the retreat, which is in Alaska. So we send OHOP veterans to Alaska, and then afterwards, of course, they come back and they've had an on-fire experience, but they really need care after that. So we have a whole, I'm actually building an application now to help coordinate those efforts between the chaplains and the veterans. So we have international projects, again, the ministry that Tim is working in. I didn't mention World Medical Missions, Children's Heart Projects, the DARTs, or the Disaster Assistance Response Teams, which I did mention a little bit about that. Of course, the field offices, the one big part that I really didn't mention, I think is really important here, is the global security team. So we have a global security team that's using GIS to understand what's happening in the world as far as the incidents of emergencies or conflict or that sort of thing. So that team is sort of our eyes watching out for anyone that's in the ministry, and they actually have a red phone in the office, and anyone can call if they need to be extracted in an emergency. So those folks are really using the technology in dramatic ways. And then, of course, I'm in IT, and blessing to be in IT. And as you can see, there's 110 employees in IT that I get to rub shoulders with. So learn a lot from a lot of different folks. So this being my first year at the ministry, I've kind of been afforded a really big, wide net of just some time to kind of sit back and look and see what we're doing and how well we're doing with the ministry. And right now, currently, we're working on what I call the foundation. And that foundation includes Portal. We're actually implementing Portal internally. We're using ArcGIS Online a little bit, but more and more we're using Enterprise, ArcGIS Enterprise, which is what most people call Portal. Right. And then part of that is I've been able to also evaluate the ministry, see where we're at. And I want to talk a little bit about that in the next slide, and then plan for the future. So where are we as a ministry? And I think this is really important and something that, again, I've been afforded to really look at. And it's pretty easy to understand that as a disaster relief, primarily using the technology in disaster relief situations, we're a very reactive organization. But we're not really a proactive organization. And that's where I want us to get to, and where that vision comes in. And of course, there's a lot of ad hoc work going on, but for the most part, I'd say we are a very, very proactive reactive organization that needs to become a proactive organization. Another way to look at this is, where are we in this kind of continuum of initializing, maintaining, enabling, and optimizing? And really, that little symbol there on the side shows about where we're at. We're in this maintenance stage of GIS where we have the tools, we have the technology, we have sort of the foundation, but we're not leveraging to support business and we are leveraging the technologies to work in all of our departments, but we're not really using it in a shared way. And so it's kind of being utilized in a very siloed way. And I bet most of you are familiar with that. I think this happens a lot with GIS, is that siloing happens. And this is true for us. But I really want us to get to the place where we're more proactive and where we're enabling the whole organization to use the technology in dramatic ways. So that's the blessing of my position, where I can sit back and kind of talk about that stuff and kind of plan, or how are we going to do that? But currently my role is to support those power users. I call them the power users, like Tyler, like Tim that you met. So the power users are in these ministries, mainly in OCC, Operation Christmas Child. You haven't met anyone from there because they weren't able to make it today, but we have one GIS person there. We have one in NAM temporarily, but we're hiring, and we have one in international projects, and we have multiples in the GSOC, or the global security team. So to me, support means many things. It's developing and maintaining the resources for these guys, the important guys out there, to do the work, the guys and the gals that are using the technology. So like I said, I'm the systems manager. So I'm maintaining the infrastructure, really planning a better infrastructure, and then also planning about how we might do automation using tools like FME. The other part of it is that I really am encouraging my staff to take more training so that we can get to that proactive stage. And how do we do that? Well, I think the training is going to help with the automation pieces so that these guys can be freed up to do more proactive things, more analytic things. And then, of course, like I said, I'm afforded this time where I can really envision where we go. One thing I wanted to just highlight a little bit, to how do you get to that proactive stage? And I've listed some things that I really want us to do proactively as an organization. And the way you do that is you see data as an operational differentiator, just as this quote at the top says. That we're really, because we're a reactive organization and we've grown leaps and bounds in the last few years, we've really been kind of a boots on the ground organization. We send people, they evaluate, and we figure out what we're going to do. But I think data, more and more data, whether it's real-time data or data that we're collecting, can help us get over that hump of just reacting to the situation and becoming more and more proactive. So data, we need to become more of a data-driven organization, and that's part of my role, is to help us get there. And what's beautiful is I have the IT support. IT leadership is really talking about this need to become more data-driven than just the way we've been doing it in the past. We're not there yet, but we're slowly working our way there. So what's the near future look like for us? Well, I am migrating all of our content, users, groups, everything to internal, and we're going kind of against the grain of what is the modern approach. I think the modern approach for a lot of organizations is migrating into AWS or whatever cloud infrastructure. We're building our own internal cloud infrastructure. Can you believe it? It's a huge undertaking. We're moving all of our ministries, websites, applications to our own cloud infrastructure. So we have this huge, that's why IT is fairly large. So we have this huge team working on that project to help us consolidate everything into what we're calling the ARC, A-R-K. So yeah, my job currently is to really bring us to that place, and that's the foundation, is building portal there, a dev, a test, and a production portal into our ARC infrastructure, and really migrating everyone there. And it's fairly large undertaking, but once we get there, I think we're going to be on a firm foundation where we can really move forward. And like I mentioned here, our ArcGIS online organizational account will become really our place for public content, and everything else is going to go into our internal portals. And then the future that I'm looking at is really a more cohesive and comprehensive strategy that's going to help us to become that more proactive and less reactive organization. So we've got to have that foundation built to even be able to do that, right? And then what I want to do is really build this as an enterprise solution for our organization. So that means that every wing of the ministry that I listed on that one slide really knows that the tool is there, understands that they can utilize those tools for various needs. So there's a lot that I need to do as far as demonstrating to our leadership and to the teams to help them understand that that's available. And of course, there's just some background stuff that you have to do, such as building policies and having a committee to really drive this forward. It can't just be me, right? It has to be those power users out there that are communicating the message. So we're forming a committee in the future, and really I'm working on policies and procedures. It sounds kind of boring, right? But stuff that you really have to do to set that foundation. And then really the goal is to set up automation and free up the power users so that they can start to show the power of GIS through the analytic capabilities. And we've done that in some areas. We're doing it in some areas, specifically in OCC, Operation Christmas Child, but we can do it more so in other areas. And I know Tim could probably talk for hours on that whole idea. But anyway, that's the bulk of my presentation. I'm sure, well, I'm hoping you guys have a few questions for me. But in summary, we are using GIS in the ministry. As you can tell, it's being utilized, but it's really in ministry silos. So providing that common platform is really going to be important to begin to, and the communication piece is really important to begin to have the ministry use it as an enterprise tool and really see it as just another tool in their tool belt. Like I said, we want to go from reactive to proactive, and there's all kinds of steps that we can take there. I didn't go into any details. We could go back to that slide and I could talk a little bit more about some of those proactive things that are in my brain. Again, I said the power users, whether it's the Tim or the Tylers or the Mikes or whoever, I want them to become more focused on analytics and less so on just map making. I mean, right now we're using the technology more as a display tool, and we're not using it so much as an analytic tool to help us get to that more proactive stage. And then yeah, like I said, I want the organization to use these tools as widely as possible. And so again, it's a communication thing. it's actually a cultural thing too, kind of a cultural change where you go into more of a data-driven mindset, understanding that if the data is there to help you, you don't always need to send boots on the ground right away. You can make some decisions based on the data, and we're hoping to get there. It's going to take some time for sure, but we're moving towards that. But the end goal, again, and I wish I could go back to that slide with the hugging people, but I think, you know, it's burned into my mind, is it's so important that we keep the people that we're ministering to in mind, and that our ministry is to them and to help them understand the love of Jesus through his hands and feet extended through Samaritan's Purse. So thank you so much for letting me present this. I hope you could gather some good information from that. And if you have any questions, I'm open if this is the right time for questions. Is it?
Definitely good for questions. Yeah. Yeah. Feel free, anybody, to fire the questions.
Michael, what kinds of questions are you asking to set up for analysis?
Yeah, so let's go back to that slide. Let's see if I can fire that one up again. This one. So these are some of the things, the proactive things that I was talking about. Oh, phooey, I don't need to click. I'm sorry. I must be a PowerPoint newbie. So some of the things that I've thought about is just placing our resources at optimal locations. So right now, those disaster response units that we have, those large 18-wheeler units, we do place them in certain locations ready to be deployed, but could we do that more effectively? Could we actually put resources, some of our other resources, in place? So doing some analytics around where are hurricanes happening the most, you know, and that sort of analysis that needs to happen. So the next one, being prepared in large scale disasters to analyze data at a pace that lessens the need for boots on the ground. So what I'm hoping to see, and we're forming relationships with folks like Vexel Imagery, who do imagery right after a disaster and deliver it in less than 24 hours. I'm looking to try to do analytics on that, because what we often do is send the boots on the ground, the people, to do that analysis. Could we do that analysis quicker to find out where are the most downed trees? Where is there the most roofs that are off of houses? Where should we go to concentrate our efforts instead of sending people, you know, to do that analysis? Can we do that quicker? Can we do that more effectively? Responding to trends in a timely manner. So a lot of conversations during the COVID crisis have really been, are we ahead of the curve or behind the curve? And oftentimes we're behind the curve. The curve, you know, the epidemiological curve has already peaked, and should we send clinicians to these areas? Well, it's already on the downtrend, and so we make the decision no. Could we have been more proactive with the data to say, where is this data trending upward, and can we send clinicians to those places where the data is trending upward? That kind of thing. So, and then understanding how to effectively expand our delivery of shoeboxes to children with OCC is a big deal too. And I don't think we're doing enough in that arena either. Does that help?
Thanks. Yeah. Any other? Thank you, Mike, and thank Michael for that presentation. There's a lot of information there. You guys are doing a lot. Anybody else with questions?
Maybe a comment from Tim or even Tyler. Tyler, what you should do is show them the warehouse behind you. That would be kind of interesting. You can just pan your so that's the warehouse where a lot of the equipment gets shipped out of. He's in Wilkesboro, which is about 30 minutes from where I'm at. And our emergency field hospital actually is set up and delivered. Whatever needs to be delivered, you know, packaged into boxes, is packaged into boxes there and then shipped off to the airport to be distributed through the airplane network to wherever they need to go. There's medical equipment. I'm off to Tyler's left. You're right. That is also something that's part of our World Medical Mission, where we deliver medical equipment to various places throughout the world. So we get donations of medical equipment, we refurbish it and then deliver it to nations that need that medical equipment. So anyway, there you go. A little bit about that. I heard somebody was going to have a question, and then I think I interrupted him.
Mark,
Yeah, just a quick question. Thank you, Michael. That was a great presentation. You guys are doing some really amazing things. I think one thing that might be useful for the folks on this call is you touched on raising the level of awareness with management, and of course we all think GIS is more important than our bosses do. But how have you been able to apply GIS and help them understand how it can get to their goals as executives?
Yeah, and that's a great question. We really haven't started on that process other than internally to IT. So it's more been a communication piece with management and helping them understand how they might deliver it to the upper. So we have the vice president level throughout the ministries. Every ministry has a vice president. And so our vice president, one down from him, is really the person that is driving this data driven decision-making processes. And so I've been communicating directly with him, and my focus right now, of course, like I said, is to get us onto Portal in the ARC. But next year, I'm really going to focus on how can I communicate better with Kyle, that guy that I'm talking about, the leadership, and that he can begin, or we can begin to communicate that message. So some of it is I call it dog and pony shows, right? You just go out there and you show people what the capabilities are, and you can use examples that we already have, like the Beirut. How are we using that Beirut example to really do analyses and to determine what the best approaches are. So yeah, it's a kind of a next year thing. It's not like it's happened yet, but it to me, it's a big communication thing that has to happen, and it is a showing off of the technology and also envisioning a little bit. So here's where it can go, here's where it can grow, and so it's kind of a slow burn because I'm only one person and can only do so much, and I'm a little bit distracted now with getting everything into Portal. But next year, big part of my push is to get out there and really start showing this off and really helping people understand how it can become that operational differentiator.
Great, thank you. Well, I would argue actually you're already on the road. You've already recognized using this for being proactive, which I think is great. So thank you.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you. That was some really, really amazing what you guys are doing at Samaritan's Purse. I see parallels to what I'm trying to do within our movement in South America.
Sure.
I use GIS extensively, but really what we're trying to do is find out what's actually happening on the ground. So it's really more on the trend analysis, predictive element of what's actually happening on the ground in the remote areas, in the remote villages, through the filter of language and culture, and trying to develop effective mission strategies for indigenous missionaries to go and reach other tribes that don't have the gospel. And this is exactly what I would love to see long term for what we're doing, having all this infrastructure in place where we can actually be able to inform a large network of ministries so that they can pray and engage effectively to helping where help is needed. And right now we're just dealing with surveys and training people to do basic field research and then trying to report it and share it throughout our network. But this is something I would love to see over time that we can actually eventually do ourselves. We are nowhere near. I'm the only guy who does this for this network, but it's really, really amazing to see, really, really encouraging to see that this is doable. But I know it's intensive.
Yeah, it takes a lot of resources, and obviously I said we've got 110 IT professionals. Of course, we've got a security team, and there's various teams within IT that are doing different things. But the one thing that I didn't probably put enough detail to is that in our internal ARC, we're trying to do that as open source as possible. So obviously Esri is licensing, so it's not open source, but we're implementing everything on Linux, and our databases are Postgres. So there's that openness to it, which I think is important for this community, right? Because oftentimes you're trying to do things on a shoestring, and so open source probably makes the most sense in that case. And so we are going down that route really hard and heavy. And the blessing of having the resources that we have is that we can have our own data centers. So we have multiple data centers already. We're looking at having possibly a data center in Europe. So, but again, maybe this is a shameless plug. That resource, the ARC, will eventually be available to other ministries. And I don't know if there's going to be a cost involved or what. I would assume a minimal cost as much as we can keep it minimal. So you might want to keep that on your radar a little bit if you're interested in using a cloud resource that is more ministry based, Christian based. The focus for our organization is really to be moving into that infrastructure, because we're cognizant that sometimes our message is interpreted in a way that maybe AWS, the Jeff Bezos of the world, might not like. And so could we get shut down from AWS? That's the concern. And it actually did happen for one thing, where I think there was a ministry that was using Microsoft products, and Microsoft, and gave them the nonprofit licensing. And Microsoft said, no, we're not going to give that to you anymore. So suddenly their licensing costs went from 10,000 to hundreds of thousands, right? And they couldn't afford that. So yeah, there's that. And just wanted to let you guys know that since we're building this cloud infrastructure that's going to have multiple data centers, it's going to be a resource for other Christian ministries in the near future.
I wonder if even, like for what we do, we could even feed into it as well as part of, from the end, because we are dealing with very remote areas, but even areas that I see, for years, I've seen, the benefit of having some information available in a disaster type scenario, having some knowledge, some information available about the area and the people, and access to those remote areas, that sort of thing too. So I'm sure that would be really, really great if we could all work together in time on these kinds of things.
Yeah, and I haven't done a really good job of saying that Esri has been a super blessing. I'm so thankful for Mark being on this call. Esri has given us, through their nonprofit program, licensing that's just unreal. I worked in the private sector before coming to Samaritan's Purse, and I'm looking at the licensing, the software that Esri is giving us as $250,000 value, really, and they're charging us minimal for that. They're nowhere close to that, So it's just a blessing to have that from Esri, to have those tools and resources. And the segue into that is that I really believe that Esri has now provided a platform for GIS users to really come together. Portal and Hub and all that becomes a resource where we can start joining data together in matching data together in really phenomenal ways. And maybe the open source world is doing the same. I haven't really kept my finger on the pulse of that, but Esri has really provided the tools and resources to do that, to bring us together, where that hasn't really been, throughout my career. That's always been a goal of Esri's, but I think they're there now. They weren't there before, just even 6-10 years ago, but now they're there, where we can start really sharing and collaborating and bringing data together. So I think that's a big part of it.
Well, maybe you should move on to our next project, but maybe Michael, thanks again, Mike, for the presentation. Maybe why don't you put your email in the chat, just if somebody wants to contact you later. And of course, you all could look at the Christian GIS email folder and find emails opposed to, but Michael, if you could put just an email in the chat, just so people could contact you later.
Yeah. Let me stop sharing. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, thank you. And Mike Waid, will you be ready to present?
Sure. Yes. Great.
Let me
Thanks.
give you a very quick Well, why don't you just introduce yourself? I think you can do a better job than I can.
Well, my name is Mike Waid, and I work with Campus Crusade for Christ International with our Global Church Movements Division. And so what Michael Bishop and Samaritan's Purse has shown you as far as kind of more of an organizational use of GIS, what we'll be describing to you is a little bit more of a application use. So one of the big things that we do with Global Church Movements and partnering with other organizations is understanding where is the church currently, ultimately so that we can understand where does the church still need to go? Where does churches still need to be planted around the world in order to give everyone access to a church? Global vision that our ministry, as well as many other ministries, have is seeing a church for every 1,000 people. It's been described in different ways, or a church for every village. Different ways of kind of describing that same concept of expanding church presence or church saturation around the world. And so several years ago, we began working on developing a tracking system for understanding not just how many churches, but where are these churches located. And so what I want to share with you a little bit is kind of what we've been doing with a system we've entitled called ISHARE. So ISHARE is, let me switch over there. ISHARE is a mapping system that we utilize for measuring and mapping new groups and churches and communities that are distributed around the world. And so although the system is managed and maintained by Campus Crusade for Christ, we see it as a tool that's being used by various different organizations around the world, much like we approach the use of the Jesus Film Project, which is managed and maintained by Campus Crusade. It is a tool that belongs to the body of Christ. So kind of give you just a quick overview. I'm going to give you an overview of iShare as an application, but as much as possible, I'm going to kind of dig into some of the technical aspects, assuming that this group is more interested kind of in the GIS aspects of this project, more of than its overarching purpose or how it kind of got formed. But this is kind of the aspects of the main criteria we utilized in the development of the application, that it was location information we were trying to understand. We wanted to do strategic visualization of that data. We wanted to simplify the input of data so that different organizations could bring their information into the system. We wanted to utilize existing human workflows within each of these organizations, and we wanted the system overall to be partner focused. So as far as location information, really there's kind of two different ways in which we deal with location in the system. This whole system is, we're using Postgres database. I'll be describing some things maybe that are very different than what Michael described. So in our case, we are using AWS. We're using a Postgres database in AWS for storing all of our data in a secure environment. And then we use Esri's products for visualizing that data within that and doing some other analysis. We've just started utilizing some of their Insights products as well as some of the other things that they offer. But there's two ways in which we capture location information. First of all, the system is country specific, so that when we make this available to an organization, they set up in a sense their own account where they can maintain their own data. One of the things we talked about in developing this was data isolation, so that each organization's data is isolated from all the other organizations, so they maintain their own information. It really becomes kind of their own system that they can utilize. And it's country specific so that they can distribute this based upon how their organization is structured, and they can even give users different access to different countries. So a user in that one organization could have access to 2 or 3 countries, and a different user different countries if they wanted to. We talk about breaking down the countries into administrative boundaries. So we utilize kind of the contiguous boundaries of a country in order to better visualize how the church is being distributed. And so we'll break that down into broad, administrative levels, all the way down to getting down to the village or neighborhood level of administrative boundaries, so that we can begin to kind of drill into how is the distribution taking place. So the value of a contiguous boundary really gets into more of how this is used by management to understand where is the church and where is it not. Not just so much the pinpoint locations, but more of the saturation of saying, are we reaching this geographic area with a church? Obviously, this approach could be used for other types of services. We've worked with some of the humanitarian aid aspects of understanding, maybe where is well water projects taking place or things like that that could be used. But at this point, iShare is really focused on the church planting or church saturation aspect. The other way you could obviously gather GIS information is through GPS coordinates of knowing exactly the location of a church. The reason we do both of these as far as location, GPS, as well as boundaries, is that sometimes the people providing this information, the organization, may not actually be tracking the exact location. They don't know the GPS coordinates, but they know the kind of the village name, or they might know the area. Otherwise, other reason you might not have it is because of security reasons. You don't want to give a specific location of something, but you can describe it, hey, it's in this county of the country, or it's in this particular district, or even down to the village level without giving the exact location. So it gives some level of security beyond just obviously the technical security of the system itself. Then as far as strategic visualizations, some of the things we're doing is allowing you to give a church planting progress. So this would be a look at kind of a specific organization to know where are they planting churches, and breaking that down again geographically to say, okay, I can give you, the areas in which we are working. But to go beyond that is also to get into kind of that same information, but now from a church saturation perspective, to say, not just where are we, how many churches do we have in a location, but what's the relationship between that and the population. So it's more of a church to population ratio. Lauren's done a lot of work for us here on this of using population density maps, of overlaying that on top of these geographic boundaries, so we can break down a country's population and down to even the village polygon layers that we're utilizing, so we can understand what is, if there's 5,000 people in that village, then it gives you a sense of knowing how many churches you might need just from a geographic saturation. Obviously, there's other factors that get into church saturation, language, people group, some of those other aspects, but from a geographic perspective, we can use population. The other thing you get into is using heat maps. Again, this just gives you a sense of where's the concentration of churches. This can oftentimes lead to understanding of maybe where particular groups are focusing their efforts, and maybe where they have resources that can be utilized to expand their ministry into maybe neighboring geographic regions, or even developing partnerships between multiple organizations to understand where each one of them are working and how they can come together to work maybe in an unreached area that's in the vicinity of all three of them. Then also just keeping track of individual church details, being able to pull up information about where our church is, where it's located. We utilize just some very basic information that we're gathering about a church that takes place. And this next slide kind of gets into that simplified data input. Again, since we're using this across multiple organizations, we're not trying to be a CMS system for your church where you're going to capture everything you want to know. This is really about broad information that allows for data sharing. The reason the system is called iShare is that its focus is on data sharing across organizations. And so the kind of data that the system captures is group data, events, as well as stories. So groups is a way of kind of maintaining where a group is taking place. You gather that information on the field, and then we input that just into a simple spreadsheet. That spreadsheet can then be uploaded into the system to immediately put the data into the system. Interesting enough, a previous version of this system, we focused on a map level input, kind of much like you would do in a Google map where you drop a pin on a map and say, okay, here's my church and here's the information. What we found was that 99% of the time, the data that was coming into the system was not being entered by the church planter, but by the person who was supervising them. So somebody was gathering this information together, and then their role was to kind of put into the system a whole set of data. And by, the first version being a kind of a one-by-one process was very laborious for this. So we went to what we called an agent model of the data system, where data can be batch input into the system to utilize that other aspect. The other thing is that what we realize is that while I'm going to pause on that because I'm going to talk about that in the next one. The other thing we talk about gathering is these group events of where they take place, whether it's gathered at a meeting or on the field. That data can be provided to an agent who can then input the data into the system through a spreadsheet method, as well as through events that can take place, like trainings that might take place, Bible distribution, compassion events, prayer walks. You can put these types of events into the system, which allows us in a later phase to begin to correlating event data that may actually helping to lead to churches. So you begin to evaluate what kind of events took place prior to a church plant in order to accelerate that taking place. So the kind of things we take place for a group is just basic information, the name of a church or a group that started, the date it started, the location, the generational information, is this a first generation church or second generation church, the general attendance, partnership that might take place, and then your ability to set some security settings, which gets into how this data is shared with other organizations that are using that data. Events is very similar to that. It's the name of the event that took place, what type of event. So we have different types of events. You can distinguish between training events, prayer events, outreach events, compassion events that take place, and the location, attendance. And then there's another category of this one of language, what language that was that event taking place, which we're also looking into adding that language component to the church and group as well. Then as far as I talked about the human workflow of how this data gets into the system, originally we kind of talked about iShare being an end-to-end solution where it'd be all the way from data gathering to inputting that data to visualizing, analyzing that data, and then distributing back out to the field. We found that every organization, every country, every locale had a very different business process. And so it made for a very complex system. And so we decided to make a pivot and change the iShare system really to be more focused here on the right-hand side, the cloud, of being kind of more of this sense of data sharing and data visualization. Whereas the way you'd gather that information and put it into the system, you would use whatever existing workflow you currently have within your organization to gather that information and then have someone who puts it into the system. That could be on a country by country basis or a whole organizational basis. You can kind of define how you want to distribute the input methodology within your organization based upon the granularity you want. And then as far as well, then the reporting mechanism, we provide some analysis and reports, and how you distribute those, you distribute those through your existing environment. On this, one of the things we also, it's not part of this slide, is we began to integrate iShare with other systems, so that while iShare itself does not have a data gathering component, there are other systems that are very much focused on that, but they don't have a broad data sharing or visualization component to them. So we can combine those two systems. For instance, we've basically built interfaces between iShare and GenMapper, both the No Place Left version as well as the IMB version of GenMapper. Also Disciple.tools, which is more of a DMM process for church planting, integrating their systems so that data gathered through those systems can be integrated with iShare for data for sharing as well as visualization. And then the last part is that it's partner focused. Again, this gets into the whole aspect of kind of the core aspects of why we developed the system the way we did, why we're using cloud-based computing for storage, why we're using Esri products for doing the mapping, is to make this, not specific to any organization. There's no part of this system that is actually built upon Campus Crusade for Christ infrastructure. It's all built on external infrastructure, so there's no sense of dependence or ownership that Campus Crusade for Christ, even though we're the ones that kind of have helped to develop the system. So we want it to be scalable. We want it to be low cost and have a high availability of the system for others. We want it to be secure. I mentioned data isolation between organizations. We want it to be compliant with data sharing across different countries, different areas of the world, and be able to encrypt that data so that it would be, again, secure. And as far as user management, allowing each organization to manage their own users. Once they're set up, they can maintain all their own users. They create their own users and define what kind of security rights they have within their organization. So in some sense, once they have an account, they don't need to come back to me for anything except for to share, future feature requests they want, or to begin to work on kind of data sharing with other organizations. This is the website that we're using, ISHAREsystem.org. There's a demo site for that, which I've given you a demo location. I will post into the chat the link to this presentation, so you can have this presentation and I'll obviously have this information as far as where to get this demo password. So I'll pause at this point. Let me post into the chat the link to this presentation. Hopefully I've still got it in my, there we go. And also I want to introduce to you on the call with us is Min Kong, who's been kind of our primary developer behind the scenes of a lot of the mapping. So as we get into some of the questions and answers for this, Min can begin to describe some of the, behind the scenes, how it is we're approaching this. As I said before, we're using Esri feature service for the administrative boundaries. We're storing all the location and details about the churches and the events within a Postgres database. And then we basically display that on a screen where we're using the browser to map the different locations. So the actual location data of the churches never gets into the Esri environment. We're just using it for basically kind of the boundary information. We're also overlaying different pieces of information about population that we're gathering from data density maps. We can also get into the aspect of future of doing some overlays with language polygons. So we can basically, there's a service where we can submit the boundaries of a village and it will return the languages or people group information that corresponds, that overlays with that particular boundary, and begin to identify for potential partners who are wanting to do church planting, what are the possible people groups and languages that would exist within that village as they go to work there. And so what resources then would they need in order to accomplish that. So those are some of the things we're doing. And at this point, I can open up for some questions and answers about how it is we're utilizing GIS to accomplish this.
If anybody has, questions, feel free to ask.
So this is Jerry. I just want to thank both Michael and Mike for the presentations. This has really been worth it. And I just want to make sure that we could share the recording of this with our colleagues. I know a number of people that I think would benefit from both presentations today.
I think, is that okay, Michael? Mike, just double check.
Yes, no problems with sharing anything I've described.
Yeah, so I think just from the easiest way is if I put it on YouTube unlisted. Is that okay? Or would we prefer it to be on Dropbox or something?
Oh, I think Leslie put some of the previous, she has a Google Drive that we put a link in the Christian GIS group, but actually these may be even bigger interest also.
Yeah, these will be bigger. We can,
Yeah.
I'll email and we'll discuss that offline, but
Okay.
these are being recorded with the goal of distributing them in question mark fashion, but they will be distributed.
So Mike, this is Leslie Zolman. So have you worked with, or do you know about 4K in YWAM? That's kind of where I
Yes.
started with. So it seems like so many things are the same. I was just wondering.
Well, it'd probably be best for me to have somebody from the 4K project answer that question. So Min, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Actually, I recognize your name, Leslie.
Oh, okay.
So the 4K, well, the administrative boundaries we are using is really based on the official boundaries by the countries. And I know that 4K also, one of the candidates we consider to use and so on, but we currently stick to the administrative boundary and complement with the population information. So yeah, Mike, do you have a?
Generally the one that made the 4K boundaries to like merge them, you know, based on population. So they had similar populations across. So yeah, can you, how did you guys versus 4K, like, are you part of 4K now, or can you explain that relationship?
So
I used to
Min,
be in 4K.
yeah. So Min worked on the 4K project, and now he works with iShare. So as Min said, it's a little bit different approach. Of the Omega zones were kind of similar population areas, whereas with iShare, we decided to go with official political administrative boundaries. The value that gives for us is that we can overlay lots of other data on top of that. There's obviously lots of census data that's available that can be made available. And for people on the ground who want to understand, hey, I'm working in this area, even though you obviously don't see the boundary, drawn on the ground, you have a general sense of, oh, I live in this county, versus if you asked them what Omega zone they're in, they would have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, and I think that when David Hamilton envisioned Omega zones, that was way before so many things that we can do now with maps. And it was, yeah, I think that now we can do things on the fly, and it is much more valuable maybe to use the actual political divisions. I know it took tons of time to create the Omega zones, so.
Right.
Wonderful.
Just a quick comment on the topic of political boundaries. I deal with political boundaries all the time for specifically South America. And I'm always caught up in the dilemma versus, in terms of end products, to share maps using what base data. And a lot of times I end up going towards an OpenStreetMap because there's consistency from country to country. However, when you get into specific countries, then you deal with a whole host of different sources of administrative boundaries at different levels of detail, granularity, and then they never ever fit. So that's always a constant thing that I'm dealing with. But at the end of the day, I try to go with OSM just for consistency's sake, and then case by case look at the other data that may have come from a government agency within that particular country. I was kind of curious how you do you ever encounter that problem yourself?
Yeah, so for us, as far as iShare, again, the main value of the boundaries is for visualization. And so for us, really the boundaries are representative administrative boundaries. They don't have to be exact, and they don't have to be a high resolution for us to accomplish that. And so we've used a variety of different sources. Again, we're similar to you. It's that sense of it's better to buy than build. If you build it, then you're responsible for maintaining it. And then you get into just outdated data. As you know, these boundaries change quite frequently. And so we traverse this in different ways. Currently, we're using, for our upper level boundaries, we're using open source data from the GATM project. The value of that is it's a global data set. The downside about it is it's not updated nearly as frequently using what they claim that they want to do. So you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. We're looking at some other sources of getting data, both some proprietary data that we can get from businesses that are maintaining this, as well as the possibility of just generating some of our own data, at least on the low level, kind of village neighborhood level, possibly using the GeoNames database, which is a point database. And then we could obviously generate representative shape files from that point data that are contiguous boundaries that fit within the next, the administrative boundary from GATM that's above that. So again, since we're just doing more from visualization perspective rather than, we don't have to have an official boundary to say, we're going to actually provide water sources to these, then it gives a lot more flexibility as far as being a little fuzzy on where those boundaries are.
One comment about GIS data is, well, as you know, if you go to some advanced countries where a lot of economic activities happens, you're going to find a lot of good GIS data resources. But if you go to some underdeveloped countries, because there's not much economic values, people's not investigating to create a GIS data. And so the GATM is good for leaderships and high level overview, but the people working on the field, they need more granular data, and that's where we face a lot of difficulties to acquire. So my 2 cents is also here, a lot of organizations working together in GIS, and just think about when we start merging our data, right? One of the important dimension is GIS, and if you're not aligned with our GIS data, we cannot share our information between organizations. So I think, so it's just difficulties. Secular world may pay attention a lot on the GIS data we need. This is something that the kingdom-oriented people can work, because we are not working for profit. We are working for, other goal, a grander goal, right? So, and here's a huge challenge that when we look at the GIS data, we still need some good data, which someone needs to work on, and I believe that the Christian community should take action on. Yeah.
So this is Leslie again. One comment. So the company I work with now is American Leprosy Missions. So we map leprosy and neglected tropical diseases, so in some of the poorest neglected areas. And generally I'm working with the Ministry of Health and have to get boundaries. So I'm not sure if I can always share that, but that would be cool to connect with you guys and possibly provide. I know when I was in 4K Miramar for when was difficult, and right now I'm mapping Miramar and I have down to like the 3rd admin level. So if I was able to share some of that, that might be beneficial. I don't know how we would work something out, but it would be nice if there was some way that we could start to share admin boundaries across all of our organizations.
Maybe a comment like a Dropbox system or something we could just start, because I definitely deal with data, and we can share what we have as well when we get down to those levels in the remote areas, especially because I'm also doing my own edits to make lines fit sometimes contiguously. It's a lot of work. Yeah.
So I just posted something in the chat. I don't know how many of you are acquainted with the organization WWHGD, and I'm just logging in to try to see what that means. But anyway, they have
Human geography data sets. That's the HGD.
Yeah, thank you. So they had a Mapping International Administrative Boundaries conference or webinar thing, and discussed this at length. And they also have consolidated from their partners materials and resources on this for each country. So it's worth checking on. And by all means, I thank you, Drake, for volunteering, sharing whatever you have. And I'm going to remember that because I just finished mapping Adventist administrative boundaries in Central America and the north part of South America. And, you know, I would have benefited from a quick heads up. Yeah, this is a really good data set. Or I've looked and there is nothing. So you're going to have to punt. So thank you for mentioning that.
Sure. Yeah.
And also another thing just to be aware of with WWHGD, after like sort of large international incidents, so like hurricanes, earthquakes, et cetera, they oftentimes will do a data call. And so then people will say, I have this data, you should look at this data set. So particularly if you're dealing with sort of a crisis response in a particular area, being aware of them is really important and useful.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you.
Any other questions? I think we are getting near our 9th hour, but I guess we can always sneak over. I think, of course, Juliana, you're providing our.
Yeah, I have until I've got the next half hour blocked off for this.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if people have questions, we can keep going. And of course, if your schedules allow, thank you all for taking time so far. But I really enjoyed this. Thanks for all the information. So, yeah, any other questions for Mike? Well, maybe then, maybe we could see if anybody's joined us who wasn't with us in the beginning and have. Well, thank you, Mike, too, and for sharing. And may God bless both you, Mike's and Michael's work, and keep giving you the resources. And thanks for the points about the international borders, the admin borders. Maybe we can probably work. I've dug around some myself, and anyway, that's a good idea to share. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop recording right now. If we're just going to move into more of a discussion time, just in case there's anything sensitive that people want to discuss.
That's probably safe.